السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. Assalamu alaikum to everyone who has joined us online in Bismillah. Okay. Assalamu alaikum everyone. Sorry for the mishap. I just had a technical issue on my side. Jazakallah khair for everyone who has joined us online for this Shamai'l Tirmidhi Q&A session. Alhamdulillah, over the weekend we have managed to finish the book. Today we are joined with our beloved Sheikh Ahsan, who will be going through your questions and answering them. Before we get into the Q&A, I have a few announcements that I would like to make. The first being, within the group there, we have posted a link for a form for the Arabic course that we want to start with Isnad. We would like your feedback within the timings of the course and the days as to which the students prefer, because we want to tailor it to suit as many people as possible. There are some questions on there like it being on-site or online. You can find the link within the group. After this Q&A is over, I will also repost it within the group so everyone has access to it. The second announcement is the ijazas for the Shamai'l al-Tirmidhi will be posted by the end of this week and handed out to all of you, inshallah. The third reminder is regarding Tafsir al-Sa'di. Alhamdulillah, within Ramadan, Sheikh Ahsan will be going through Tafsir al-Sa'di after Dhuhr every single day within Ramadan. As we know, on Sunday, the timings will change by 1 hour because in the UK, the times will go ahead by 1 hour. But without further ado, I would like to pass on to Sheikh Ahsan to start the Q&A.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين والعاقبة للمتقين ولا عدوان إلا على الظالمين، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له إله الأولين والآخرين، وأشهد أن نبينا محمدا عبده ورسوله المصطفى الأمين. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على عبدك ورسولك محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. Welcome to this Q&A that we usually do after every course that we do. We normally have a Q&A online, as you know by now. And inshallah ta'ala, today's Q&A is for the book that we just covered over the weekend, which is the book of Shamai'l by Imam Tirmidhi rahimahullah ta'ala bi-rahmatihi al-wasi'ah. So I'm going to go through the questions via the link that was posted throughout the course. And inshallah, we'll take as many of them as we can in the time that allows. And as we usually do, we give priority to like the questions that are related to the actual course, but you can still add questions, inshallah, and if you have time. One of the things that I've still noticed that I would prefer if people did, I know like when there's like 30, 40 questions, it's slightly difficult to do, but it would be easier if people just upvoted questions as opposed to like repeat the question over and over again. So if someone's asked a similar question or even the same question, just to give it a thumbs up and upvote it would be easier. For me as well, just it would save us time rather than repeating the same questions over and over. Okay, so let us begin. The first question is, many Muslim speakers use the hands or body language to speak these days. Is there anything to show that the Prophet ﷺ used his hands to explain things? If you mean in terms of like hand actions and movements as the Prophet ﷺ used to speak, then yes. And we even mentioned one of the narrations in the book of Imam Tirmidhi that was mentioned, where he said that the Prophet ﷺ would, if he was amazed, he would move his hand a certain way, and he would strike the palm of his right hand with his left finger, and so on. Those are mentioned, and other than that as well, in terms of the way the Prophet would make dua and so on. So yes, there is a basis for that, but those things don't necessarily it's not necessarily a sunnah or not a sunnah. It goes back to each person's own preference. Why is eating with 3 fingers a sunnah, not a cultural practice? We said that the wearing of a turban is not sunnah, as it's the culture of the people. So the difference between the two, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best, is and again, as I said before in the course as well, there are scholars who will say that wearing the turban is sunnah. And that's why you find amongst a number of Muslims, different communities and so on, that they wear the turban. Now you'll see amongst certain Muslims that they always wear the turban. And I don't doubt that they do that, except that they believe that it is a sunnah. And so there's a valid issue of difference of opinion there. Like someone holds that to be the sunnah and they wear it with that intention of it to be the sunnah. I don't think that it's correct that someone should go to them and say that they're wrong or that they're incorrect or what they're doing is not the sunnah or it's a bid'ah, Like no one says this. It is just about how we determine what is and what isn't the sunnah, and what were the normal actions of the Prophet ﷺ, his human actions, and what were the actions of his that were legislation in terms of something that we should follow. When it comes to the issue of eating with the hands or with the three fingers specifically, it's narrated by a number of the companions. And it's also said, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best, that they used to have some type of implements at that time as well. So obviously when you're cooking, anything, you're going to use some type of an implement to stir and to mix and to so on and so forth. And so it is said that they had some certain types of implements, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best, but that they used to eat with the three fingers. The reason why it's more of a sunnah, however, is because of the hadith of licking from the fingers. And so because of those hadith that go an extra step that show that this is something which the Prophet ﷺ would actually do, meaning would specifically do, that's why some of the scholars said that, and that was the norm throughout his life, as opposed to wearing the turban, which wasn't necessarily all the time. Okay, why did some groups of Muslims emphasize the wearing of a turban, especially a green turban, as an act of worship? Like I said, if that's the reason why they did it in terms of it being a sunnah, then that has its own place. Why it's green, however, I don't know, but we know that throughout history, green kind of became the default color that people chose to express, for example, their love for the Prophet ﷺ, or even all things Islamic. So the green dome on the Masjid of the Prophet ﷺ, if you go throughout history, when it was first built, it was actually silver. It wasn't a green dome, it was a silver dome. It was later colored during the Ottoman Empire green. And then the green became famous, and that's like what everyone now knows. And many masjids will imitate that and have green domes on their masjids. Actually, its original color wasn't even green; it was silver. So these things like don't necessarily have a basis in the Sunnah and the Sharia, but it's just something which happened over time, and people have just stuck with it. Did the Prophet ﷺ ever eat wheat or plain flour? We mentioned this, right? We mentioned that he ate usually barley, but there are times they used to also have wheat. And we know that they used to also have wheat because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned it in zakah, that they give as a sa' of zakah from the food items that are mentioned, or the staple foods that are mentioned, is wheat also. However, as the hadith said in the Shamai'l, that he didn't eat sieved flour or plain white flour. And that wasn't the norm. So therefore the norm would have been barley, and Allah knows best. How can we calculate the strength of a hadith on a scale of strong or weak? What level of weakness should we discount a hadith? That's a whole study. That's like a whole topic in and of itself. And inshallah ta'ala, one of the things that we will do is at some point come and discuss this in more detail, inshallah ta'ala. When reading Surah Nas, Falaq and Nas before sleep, do we read each surah 3 times or the set of surah 3 times? I think you mean Nas, Falaq, and Ikhlas. The way that it's done is you read each one once, and that's one set, and then another set, and then the third set. That seems to be the way that it is done, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. How many times did the Prophet ﷺ perform Hajj and Umrah? He performed Hajj once in his lifetime, and when we say this, we mean as a Prophet of Allah in Islam. So Hajj once and Umrah 4 times, and Allah knows best. Please, can you put the PDF text of all the previous courses on the Isnad website? Yeah, we are working on this. So there, we are, inshallah ta'ala, working on this and to put everything up onto the website. Just be patient with us and bear with us, inshallah ta'ala, and hopefully we will get to that, inshallah ta'ala. For each course, I am compiling a PDF with the list of the principles of narrators. Yes, you can share that. Like anything that is connected to Isnad. So this is like a good point that I just wanted to mention to everyone. When it comes to anything to do with Isnad that you want to share in the chat group, you're more than free to do so, as long as it's connected to the course itself. If it's not connected to the course, it's not really relevant to us. It's just people putting on general reminders and so on. I prefer that you don't do that, because otherwise it just becomes like one of those groups where everyone's just posting every random bit of item or every lecture or every there's like a course going on here or a lecture going on here or whatever. I would prefer that we just keep this strictly for Isnad. So anything that's not in the Isnad or part of Isnad or to do with Isnad, we just stay away from that. And that way, we just keep it to this rather than it becomes something where people, it just kind of becomes something where everyone's just posting everything that they want. What is the best way to retain the knowledge that we learn? Revision and teaching. So to study, to go over it, to revise it, to teach it, these are all good ways of retaining knowledge. I'm currently studying Medina Arabic Book 1 and then hopefully Book 2 online via YouTube. Should I carry on studying this or stop for the Isnad Arabic course? Don't stop anything, because we haven't announced an Arabic course yet. We're still getting feedback and we're speaking to people and whatever. Nothing's been announced. There's no finalized thing. We haven't announced anything. I've just said that this is something we're looking to do. I need some feedback from people to give me their views and what they think will work and won't work in terms of times and logistics. And then inshallah, we'll see where we go from there. So, don't cancel anything or change plans or book holidays or anything else, because we haven't yet announced anything. What topic book will we be studying after Ramadan? Inshallah, that will be announced in due course. Will we study any books of Zuhd, such as the Zuhd of Ibn Abi Asim? Yes, inshallah, we will study the books of Zuhd, or at least some of the books, or one book on Zuhd and so on. The idea, inshallah ta'ala, is that we will, throughout the the course of the Al-Isnad life span, if you like, or whatever, the whole life cycle thing of Al-Isnad, we are going to cover all of the major topics that the Salaf wrote about, inshallah ta'ala, in one way or another. As for which specific book, is it like the brother saying, the Zuhd of Ibn Abi Asim or the Zuhd of Imam Ahmad or someone else? That is yet to be determined. And as I said before, one of the main reasons for that is because we don't have access to them in terms of translation, right? None of this stuff is translated to the best of my knowledge anyway. And so what that means then, when something's not translated, is that someone has to translate it, usually myself. And that's like a consideration as well. But inshallah ta'ala, at some point we will go through something. We went through the Muwatta of Imam Malik with Shaykh Abdullah al-Ubaid. Can we go through some of the Darimi too sometime in the future? Inshallah. I mean, hopefully, inshallah, if the Shaykh comes and he's able to come and spend some time with us again, we can look at doing something else. And Allah knows best. If Isnad is over in 6 years, can we carry on this style 1 weekend a month, going through books like Musnad Ahmad, Tafsir al-Tabari, Musannafat? Like personally, I don't have an issue. Like I don't have an issue with that in principle. However, they are very long books, and to expect them to be translated and for us to read them in the way that we would do at a Isnad course is probably not realistic, simply because the edition that the Tabari that I have is like 40 volumes, and the Musnad Imam Ahmad has some 40,000 narrations. We did a whole weekend on 400 narrations. Like the Shamai'l has 400. That's 40,000. So it would take us a very long time to even just to read, even without commentary, just simply to read that, even just in Arabic, with that translation, would take a long time. But the scholars did that, and it's a good thing to do. However, I would rather for Isnad that we reach a certain level, and then that's something for that's more advanced perhaps, or requires more discipline in terms of the way that we would study that. So that wouldn't be something like a weekend course once a month, because you'd be there for like many years. You were going to provide some narrative on the Prophet ﷺ wearing red. I cannot recall this being discussed. I mentioned this, and that is that the Prophet ﷺ, when he said not to wear red or a particular color, it was usually because that color in that way was the dress of the people of or the religious identity or symbol of other religions. And so because of that, the Prophet said, don't wear that type of red, because certain colors are attributed to certain religions in the way that they dress. So every religion, like for example, Christian priests dress in a certain way, right? Jewish rabbis dress in a certain way. Everyone has their religious dress that's known by. So if you were to imitate that, irrespective of the color, that wouldn't be allowed. Was there a particular type of oil that the Prophet ﷺ used in his hair, beard, and body? Allah knows best. Allahu a'lam. Is kuhl permissible to wear outside of the house for a lady? If it's going to attract attention and something which is going to like make people look at you more intently, then no. Then it's better to avoid it. Recommended Arabic shuruh of this hadith explanation or collection. So there are a number of explanations that were done for Shamai'l of Imam Tirmidhi. From them is Al-Mawahib al-Ludunniyah by Juri. From them, or maybe, and those are like the older ones. It's like there's a number of books that were written like classically, or even like for a few hundred years back, with the explanation of Shamai'l. But more recently, Shaykh Abdul Razzaq al-Abbad from Medina, he has an explanation in book form, which is a very good explanation. And also the teacher of our teacher, Shaykh Thana'ullah Khan al-Madani, rahimahullah ta'ala, the scholar and Imam of Hadith from Pakistan, he also has a book on this as well. The difference between the two is Shaykh Thana'ullah in his also focuses on the narrators and the hadith and the grading. But Shaykh Abdul Razak doesn't really go into that. He's more looking at the benefits of these hadith and the lessons that we learn and so on and their meanings. Most men wear trousers below the ankles as a cultural norm, not due to pride. Does this go against the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ? So this is where there's a difference of opinion, as we mentioned, right? So some of the scholars say that it is better and safer that you simply keep your garments above the ankles. And others said, no, if it's not done with that reason or with that intention of it being out of pride or arrogance, then it is permissible. And I think, that there is a valid difference of opinion there. No doubt if it's done out of arrogance and pride, then it's haram, because that is what a number of the hadith state explicitly. And if it's not done for that reason, then even if someone is going to do it, I would say you do it, just around the ankle or just above, because otherwise it would look, for example, in trousers, it would look peculiar, it would look out of place, because like you said, that's not the norm. And if someone was to have it below the ankles, as a number of our teachers do and did previously as well, then, inshallah, that's okay, because there is an issue of a valid difference of opinion here, and Allah knows best. Which fingers did the Prophet ﷺ forbid wearing the ring on? So what he would usually wear, what the narration says, is that he would wear it on the pinky, right, the small finger. And there are narrations in the Muslim Muhammad from Ali radiallahu anh that he forbade him. He says, he forbade me from wearing the ring on the index finger and the middle finger. And as you said, some of the scholars said, because those are the fingers that people use often, right? When you hold a pen, when you're working, when you're picking something up, when you're eating, because the Prophet would use those two fingers alongside the thumb to eat with. And so he wouldn't like that you use you have your ring on those fingers, and Allah knows best. But either way, it's not, as far as I know, no one said it is haram. It is simply a matter of preference. Are there other authentic dua that the Prophet said before eating other than Bismillah? As far as I know, before eating, Bismillah was what he would say. But then there are books of dua that if you read them in detail, you will find numerous du'as for all of these different issues. From the narrations we went through, what is the most authentic dua to recite after finishing eating, or are they all permissible to say? They're all permissible to say. But the ones that you have, for example, like even in the book of Shamai'l, some of them are from Bukhari and Muslim. I know that those, in terms of their wording, are always going to be more precise than other than them. However, all of them are fine to say. Did the Prophet ﷺ often pray salah without making wudu after waking from his sleep? So this, if you look at these ahadith, it is usually in a situation where he has wudu and he's prayed, and then he's napped again, and then he's woken up for salah, as those ahadith that we studied in the book show. That it's usually he's prayed salah, then fallen asleep, then he's in a state of wudu and fallen asleep, and then he's awoken after a short while from a deep sleep, and he doesn't need to make wudu again. But it wasn't the normal practice. So it wasn't something which he never made wudu. In fact, he would often make wudu, as we know, because even in the act of wudu itself is reward, because it is an act of worship. Can we go through Qawaid al-Muthla after Ramadan? It's probably not going to be our next course. Doctors recommend around 8 hours sleep to stay healthy. The Prophet only slept a portion of the night, so how many hours of sleep was enough for him? So remember that they used to sleep fairly early. So the way that it works in like towns and small towns and villages, especially before people had electricity, and even now, if you go to those places where in the villages in Pakistan and other places, you will see that people after Maghrib, they kind of wind down. After Isha, everyone kind of stays indoors, like you don't really visit people and so on. And if someone comes for a short while and then they leave, and so you can sleep fairly early. And also, in those countries, the timings of Maghrib and Isha don't vary as much as they do, for example, in Northern Europe, where Maghrib will go in the winter from 4 p.m. all the way to like 9:30, 10 p.m. in the summer. They don't really have that type of variance in their timing in those climates or in those countries. And so therefore the Prophet would sleep. And so if you sleep, just say you slept at 9 p.m., because you prayed Isha around 8:30, or sleep 9:30, and then Fajr is around 5, 6 o'clock. Even if you were to sleep from 9 or 9:30 or even 10 all the way to like 4, that's like 6 hours, right? That you can sleep with. And most people, I think, can last with that type of sleep. And it's about what you train your body to do. People, I know many people that used to only sleep and still only sleep like 3, 4 hours. If that's just something which you customize your body to, and it's something which you've done for many years, people can become accustomed to it. But obviously, if it's not something which you're accustomed to, then it will affect you in terms of your productivity for the next day. Were the 2 short rak'ahs separate to the rest of the night prayer of the Prophet ﷺ? If you prayed 8 units, does it include that? That's why some of the scholars said you find different narrations. So the narrations that say that he prayed 11 rak'ahs, and then there are narrations that said that he prayed 13, that those were the norms that he prayed. Some of the scholars said that the 11 and the 13, the difference is those 2 rak'ahs. One narrator doesn't count them and the other one does. Either way though, they are from the night prayer, because anything you pray at the night, irrespective of its length, is considered to be from the night prayer. The hadith of Hudayfa radiallahu anhu, does this mean the Prophet prayed all night without sleeping, considering his pace of recitation was slow? That wasn't the usual practice of the Prophet that he would pray without sleeping, unless it was the last 10 nights of Ramadan, as we know, as is established in his sunnah. He would often rest, and then he would wake up and pray salah. Often rest and pray salah. However, at times, his sleep may have been less and his salah may have been longer. So yes, that's possible, and Allah knows best. Sheikh has said we will be going through Tafsir al-Sa'di in Ramadan, when we will be notified about timing and such. So Ishmael just announced that, and he'll announce it again at the end of today's session. But inshallah ta'ala, we'll begin from the first day of Ramadan, as we have been doing for the past few years. I'm confused about the hadith of Abu Zar. How what the women were doing differs to backbiting. Did it occur before the prohibition on backbiting? So it's not backbiting. The scholars say it's not backbiting. Imam al-Nawawi and others who commented on this hadith, Ibn Hajar and others, said that it's not backbiting for the reason that those women didn't know who, or those women that are together, those 11 women, don't know the identities of those husbands. They're just 11 women that happened to meet, and they just agreed that they would do this. So it was something which they did, and they don't really know who their husbands are. So if, for example, someone was to come today and say, there's someone from my neighborhood, and this is what he does, and so on. You don't know who that person is. So even if that person is speaking about them in a negative way, you don't know who they are. And if you can't identify them, then it's not considered to be ghiba, because ghiba is if that person is identified and you know who they are. And that is why the Prophet ﷺ would often stand on the minbar and he would say, Ma balu aqwam, what is wrong with people that they do? And it's someone who's actually done it. And those people who are there, sitting there, who have done that action, they know that the Prophet ﷺ is referring to them. But the rest of the people don't know. They don't know who is being referred to. And so that's okay. So that seems to be the reason, and Allah knows best. Would a sister wearing a ring on her left pinky in order to follow the sunnah be rewarded for that, or is it specific to men? That's specific to men. So a number of the scholars in the commentary said that's for men. As for women, then they would wear in the time of the Prophet ﷺ rings on all of their, or any of their fingers, and multiple fingers, as women do today as well, where you have a number of rings on a number of fingers. And so this is different to that, and Allah knows best. How would you advise us to revise the book we have learned here? To read it over and over again. Not necessarily like now, but maybe after a few months you'll pick her up and you'll go over it again, or you'll divide it into the chapters that you have. You have 400 odd hadith, you read 30 here, another 30 another time, and so on. This is what the scholars would do. They would read those books over and over again, and as you read them over and over again, it is something which will come to, it is something which will, inshallah ta'ala, settle in you, inshallah ta'ala. I'm studying fiqh at AMAU Academy, in which they teach Shafi'i fiqh. Would you advise to take the fiqh in Isnad 2 or stick to 1? If you want to take both, you take both. I don't want to discourage anyone from studying or from learning. Obviously the way we do fiqh may be different from the way that they do fiqh. And I'm not very familiar with their syllabus or their curriculum either, so Allah knows best. It was mentioned yesterday that the Prophet ﷺ wouldn't laugh out loud. Is it good for us to avoid this in that case? Not necessarily. I mean, if it's something which you do, it's okay. There's nothing haram in it. But this was just describing to us the man of the Prophet ﷺ, that he wouldn't be overboard in anything. That was just his character ﷺ. And it also preserves, especially in public, it preserves the haiba of the person. The haiba means the respect and awe that you afford them. So if you were, and that's why you, even now you'll see, like, when it comes to prime ministers, presidents, monarchs, kings, queens, and so on, even if they're laughing at, in public, it's very like slight laughter. You never see them going completely crazy usually anyway, because it preserves for them a certain status. And so that likewise, the Prophet ﷺ, he would laugh in a measured way, right? He would laugh in a measured way. And so this was something which he would do. but like we said, with all of these things, the purpose is not to go overboard in them, in the sense that it's not something which you do and now you make your life difficult because you're trying to do that. So you know, and then you end up doing, like we said about the steps of the Prophet ﷺ. Someone can't naturally walk that way. The sunnah isn't that you overly exert yourself in trying to do that. And that's why the companions themselves, you know, that narration that we took, he's walking ahead of us and we have to struggle to keep up with him, which shows that they weren't, you know, this wasn't the norm for them. They wouldn't normally walk that way. It's not something which they then trained themselves to do just because of that particular point. Please, could you explain the meaning of basil originating from paradise? Does it refer to its concept or its essence? Some of the scholars and some of the commentaries said that basil or rayhan, which is the one that's mentioned in the hadith, that it's something which originated from paradise, and Allah knows best. Perhaps it's similar to the other hadith that say, for example, the Prophet saw rivers in paradise. From the two that he saw was the river Nile and the Euphrates, right? And so it is possible, and Allah Azza wa Jalla knows best. But as we said, other scholars said that it's not speaking about basil specifically, but rather speaking about any type of plant that is used for perfuming. Any type of plant that is used for perfuming. Would we say that the Prophet ﷺ was more beautiful than Yusuf, and there was another reason that was mentioned in the hadith of Umar and Jarir? Yes, so like as we said, right, as we explained, the Prophet ﷺ was considered to be the most beautiful person that the companions had seen. Can you explain the part of the hadith mentioned yesterday, the perfume of women is that which has a color, meaning the one that they wear in public. So in public, their scent, you know, the perfume that they wear shouldn't have a scent that emanates from them to the extent that men would smell it and be attracted to them, or their attention will be diverted towards them. So that's the meaning of it. As for at home, then they can wear as they please. We know the hadith of olive oil is an idam. However, would we get reward if we ate something containing olive oil with bread? Not necessarily. This is a lot of these hadith, as we said over the weekend, are just relaying to us the situation of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's what we said about that vinegar and so on, right? He's not necessarily saying that it's blessed. He's just saying that's the situation that we're in, and it's good enough. It's fine. That's not telling us, and people misunderstand this hadith because people think that then they should actively take vinegar as one of the components in their diet regularly. And that's not the meaning of the hadith. And so these hadith aren't telling you to eat olive oil with or to mix cucumbers with dates or anything. This is just what the Prophet preferred. And this is something which he used to eat, right? And that's why, it's not known that all of the companions had started doing this, or that this then became the norm amongst them. No. Regarding the prohibition of combing the hair, unless occasionally, is this makruh haram? It is makruh, or not even makruh, but it is something which it's better not to do all the time. Like, it's better not to do all the time. Meaning, if you miss the odd day here and there, it's okay. And I think most people, all have like a day where they're not feeling too good, or they're feeling a bit tired, and so they'll just not comb their hair. Right? You have just like a down day or a rest day or whatever it may be, when you're not necessarily going out, you're not going to work and so on, and so you leave it on that day. Is it wrong for one of us to accept the Sanad if they attended all of the sessions but missed parts or were distracted at times? So the way that this would work usually, and there's been a few questions concerning the Isnad and how it's done, especially for those online. So let me just clarify this now, and inshallah, maybe in the next course we'll speak about this in slightly more detail. So the Sanad usually would be that you hear something from beginning to end. And this is the best type of Sanad and the highest type, and that is what we call Sama'. It's a Sanad in which there is hearing that has taken place. So you heard the whole thing, right? That's the asl, that's the default when it comes to a chain of narration. Then there is another chain which we call ijazatun amma. It is just a general verbal permission to narrate. And that's when, like for example, now I'm sitting here and we're doing this over YouTube live. I can't see anyone. I don't know who's listening to me. There may be only one person in front listening to this, maybe 20, maybe 100, maybe no one. I don't know. So I would say in something like this that I just give you a verbal permission, because I have no idea of knowing who this is. And that's simply to protect this tradition of ours, that is the Sanad. So someone goes tomorrow and says, oh, I heard, Ahsan say, and he was narrating this book and I learned from him. And then someone comes and says, you have a student that said this about them. And I'm like, I don't know, because I don't know them and I don't remember everyone that comes and studies with me. But if you came and you got the paper and it says on there, and that's why the two certificates that we give out for the online and the on-site students also differs in that regard. But regarding the actual question that was asked, if you miss a part, what they would do, the scholars of old, is they would note it down. So just say, I was going through Shamai'l now, and you attended all of Shamai'l, but you missed 20 hadith. Maybe you came late to one of the sessions, you missed hadith, from hadith 300 to 320, you missed them. You would write in your ijazah, I missed these hadith. And the scholars were very, very precise in this issue. They would write it down even to that smallest thing. And there are examples of this, inshallah, when we come to the Muwatta of Imam Malik and others, where the student of Imam Malik, in the Muwatta of Imam Malik, who is Yahya al-Laythi, he missed a handful of hadith. Didn't hear them from Imam Malik. So he narrates in the Muwatta of Imam Malik, his narration of it, he narrates those 4 or 5 hadith from another student to Imam Malik. Now he could have said, I've heard the majority of it, I know this is what Imam Malik narrated, plenty of people have told me, it's enough, it's okay, who's going to mind? But no, because this is the level of precision that they had, because this is, as you know, the last narration of Shamai'l was, the statement of Ibn Sirin, rahimahullah ta'ala, this is your knowledge. So look as to who you take your knowledge from. And you take your knowledge from people who are trustworthy, precise, accurate in these types of issues. And so therefore, you know, you would write this down, or you would go to the teacher later on and say, Sheikh, I missed these 20 hadith, can I just read them to you? And that way you've heard the whole thing, whether you read it yourself or you heard it being recited to the Sheikh. As you know, some of the brothers have done now, for example, with Manhaj al-Sadiqin, they missed a couple of pages and they came and they read them to me 5 minutes, it's done. That's okay as well. So either way, it is something which is fine, inshallah ta'ala. Is it authentic that Khadija was 40 when the Prophet ﷺ married her? There are many narrations that say this. And when it comes to these types of issues, like issues of, the scholars didn't go to such a level of authenticity. Why? Because it doesn't make a difference. She was 40, 50, 60, 20, 30, doesn't make a difference to anything. And so in these types of issues, the scholars of hadith would just accept the narrations that people gave. And it's not the same as aqidah, belief, or action, worship, because no, that's like halal, haram. What does Allah want, not want? But someone's age, someone's where they lived, those types of issues, the scholars never used to go to this level of, and that's a mistake now that we have, unfortunately, in seerah, where it's become like we have to divide the seerah into authentic and weak. And we're going to apply to it the same principles of hadith that we would do to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, the other sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. No, that's not the way of the Salaf. The Salaf never used to do this with things like battles, the Battle of Badr, whether it took place in the second year, or the third year, or the first year, doesn't make a difference. Doesn't make a difference to anything. And so therefore the scholars wouldn't go to that level of this. Let the people narrate what they narrated, and you look at them and you look at the majority, and the majority is more likely to be correct. And so there are many narrations, for example, that says that she was around the age of 40. So okay, she's 40. Doesn't really add or change anything. If one wears kuhl but forgets and does wudu, does that water still penetrate? Yes, it is valid, and Allah knows best. Is it authentic that Ali was left in the bed of the Prophet ﷺ? This is similar to the previous one, the question about Khadija radiallahu anha. That's what the narrations say. And that seems to be the case, and Allah knows best. Regarding the ayah, in tu'adhibhum فَإِنَّمْ عِبَادُكَ, why was the punishment mentioned before forgiveness? And there's a similar question here about why the names of Allah al-Aziz al-Hakim are mentioned. So both are mentioned. Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions punishment and He mentions forgiveness as well. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala concludes the verse by saying that He is all mighty, all knowing. So Allah Azza wa Jalla, when He forgives from a position of might. So people sometimes forgive because of weakness. You forgive someone because you don't have a choice, because they're more powerful than you, because you have no other option. Whereas Allah Azza wa Jalla, when He forgives, He forgives despite Him being all powerful and almighty. And that is a greater and higher type of forgiveness. And then Allah Azza wa Jalla is all wise, meaning that if He chooses to punish someone or forgive them, He does so from His ultimate knowledge and wisdom subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah knows best. When the Prophet ﷺ used to pray the night prayer, he would stop and seek refuge or make dua midway. Can he give a demonstration of this, please? So for example, now the verse that we just recited, in tu'adhibhum فَإِنَّهُمْ عِبَادٌ, and then وَإِن تَغْفِرْ لَهُمْ فَإِنَّكَ أَنْتَ الْعَزِيزُ الْحَكِيمُ, speaks about punishment and speaks about forgiveness. You pause and you would say, Allahumma ghfirli, Allahumma qini min adhabi jahannam. Oh Allah, save me from the punishment of the fire. Oh Allah, forgive me. Oh Allah, enter me into paradise. You just make a dua. And you don't recite it. So it's not Quran. You just pause and you make the dua as you would, and then you continue to recite. How can we apply as many sunnahs without overburdening ourselves? So if you mean the sunnahs that are actually the sunnahs of worship, And by the way, those are the ones that are primarily the ones that you should be focusing on. So sometimes what people do is they like, no, we want to focus on how the Prophet ﷺ dressed, how he ate, what he ate, that kind of stuff. And then they ignore tahajjud, they ignore fasting, they ignore charity, they ignore all of the other stuff. No, focus on, if you're going to focus on the sunnah, start with what is more important, what is more rewarding, what is more pleasing to Allah Azza wa Jalla. Because from the traps of shaitan is that he will sometimes busy a person with good, but it is less good than other types of good, less rewarding than other types of actions. And so focus first on those ibadat, those acts of worship that are nawafil and voluntary, and build them slowly and work your way through them. How do we reconcile the hadith that says the Prophet didn't pray duha regularly, and the hadith that says 2 rakahs of duha each day suffices for charity? So those that say that he didn't pray duha regularly, this is the position of some of the scholars. But even so, the Prophet used to command or encourage the companions to do so, as mentioned by Abu Hurairah radiallahu anh, that my close companion advised me with 3 things. From them was Salatul Duha, that I should pray it every day. And no doubt the Prophet's situation is different to the situation of other people in terms of him needing to thank Allah Azza wa Jal. He would spend most of his days and evenings in worship. Here, the Prophet is saying that those people who can't do all of that, you can't use every single limb in good, because that's not your situation. You don't have that much ibadah in you that you're constantly making tasbih and takbir. And the Prophet the whole day is ibadah, constantly in the service of people and doing good. That's not my situation or your situation. We're not doing that from the moment we wake up to the moment we sleep. So from the mercy of Allah Azza wa Jalla is pray Salatul Duha, because when you offer 2 rak'ahs, then you have essentially used pretty much every part of your body. And even if you can't pray Salatul Duha, but you're praying other nawafil, then inshallah ta'ala, it is something which will suffice, and Allah knows best. With Ramadan almost upon us, what general advice do you give for the students of knowledge to benefit and maximize from this blessed month? My advice is to follow the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his companions, and the Salaf. And what they used to do in this month is that they would spend it in the Quran and the worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but primarily the book of Allah Azza wa Jalla and Salah. And so they would spend their nights in recitation and prayer, and they would spend their days in recitation of the Quran to the best of their ability. And if that's something which you can do, you focus on the Quran. And that's why in Ramadan we only do tafsir, just to help people as another way for them to connect with the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I don't teach, we don't do an Isnad course. I won't just teach a book of hadith or something else, even though there's nothing wrong, by the way, in doing that. There's, it's fine, and scholars have done that for generations, and there's no problem with it. But we want to focus this month with the book of Allah Azza wa Jal. So it's recitation, it's memorization, it's study and tafsir, contemplation, all of the different aspects in our relationship with the Quran. What can one do to increase the possibility of seeing the Prophet ﷺ in a dream? Allahu A'lam. I don't know. I don't know what you do to do that. If the time of Zawal is a prohibited time for Salah, then why did the Prophet ﷺ pray 4 rak'ahs at this time? It says he prayed it after Zawal, after the Zawal. And Zawal is only a few minutes. It's like very short. The time of Zawal is not long. It was literally, Zawal is when the sun reaches its zenith, its highest point, and then within a couple of minutes, it will start coming down again. It will start descending. And so therefore, it's not very long. There are hadith which say the Prophet fasted most of Sha'ban. There are also narrations regarding the same for Muharram. Is the latter authentic? Yes, he fasted also much in Muharram, but not to the extent of Sha'ban. Not to the extent of Sha'ban. And Allah knows best. Hadith 303 says the Prophet fasted for 3 days at the beginning of each month. Is this different to the white days because they're in the middle of the month? So as we said before, the Prophet would fast, as the companions say, whenever you wanted to see him fasting, you would have found him fasting. So he fasted the beginning of the month, the middle of the month, the end of the month. He fasted all the different days of the week. All of this to show that all of it's permissible. And then he recommended that we fast 3 days. And in some narrations, he specified those 3 days as being the 3 white days, which are the middle days of the lunar month. So the point is that you fast 3 days. You can't do the middle days, do any days. But to do those 3 days is perhaps more virtuous and rewarding, and Allah knows best. Is wearing the modern day thobe the sunnah what the Prophet wore? Not necessarily perhaps in this style, in the way that I'm wearing, but the thobe, like the qamis that he used to like to wear, was the long one. But as we know also from those narrations, he wore different things. He wore the izar, and he wore the rida, and he wore other things. And many of the scholars would say that it goes back to the custom of the people. Wear what the people of your place wear, or what the people are accustomed to. And so, living in like, for example, Birmingham, in the Muslim areas where it's very common for people, it's not like considered to be out of place for Muslims to wear this, especially in these areas and so on, it's fine. But maybe if you're going out somewhere, you're going like, to some part of the country where there's hardly any Muslims and the majority are non-Muslims and so on, then for the man, for him to choose maybe to wear something else that won't cause so much of people's attention to be drawn to them, is also nothing wrong with that either, and Allah knows best. Can fasting any 3 days of the month suffice for fasting the Yamul Bid and fasting Mondays and Thursdays? No, Mondays and Thursdays have its own, as we said, virtue because of the raising of actions. But yes, the 3 middle days, if a person can't do them, any 3 days, inshallah, will suffice because the multiplication of reward applies to all of them. Hadith 327 indicates that a person who has been intimate with his wife on the same day should not enter the grave to bury the deceased. Is this a correct ruling? Yes, it's not haram, but the Prophet preferred. Like he asked in the hadith, who didn't have relations with their wife? And Abu Talha said, I didn't. And then he chose him. And the scholars differ as to why this was. There's a lot of commentary and discussion concerning this. Some of the scholars said, because, and this is for the woman, by the way, for the woman, in the burial of the woman, not the man, because the Prophet is burying his daughter. So some of them said that the person who's had relations the night before has just been intimate with his wife, and so he's very familiar with, with that type of relationship. And so the Prophet is saying, that type of, the person that's just done that, better for them to stay away from holding, carrying, and taking another woman into her grave. Even when she's, I remember in the olden days, by the way, and even today in many Muslim countries, they never used to use coffins. You would actually hold the body shrouded and you hold it, right? And I'm sure many of you have seen this and are aware of this. So in the coffin is different now, right? The coffin, it doesn't really make a difference because you're not holding the body anyway, you're holding the coffin. But we're talking about actually handling the deceased person, the body. Whereas someone who hasn't had relations recently, they're less likely to be to have that type of image in their mind and so on. That's what some of the scholars said, and other scholars said other things, and Allah knows best. Can you give examples of showing off in a speech versus showing off in action? So one is in terms of something which you say that is showing us, that is shown, that is seen. So for example, if you were to pray because you want to impress someone who's watching you pray, and the other one will be reciting Quran because that's something which people hear, right? And so the two are different things, or something similar to that regard. Allah knows best. The chapter headings of the book, was this done by Imam Tirmidhi himself or by later ulama? As far as I know, is by Imam Tirmidhi himself, and Allah knows best. And it's very common, as we know, in the books of hadith, in many of the collections of hadith of that generation, where they would have chapter headings. So Bukhari did the same, and Tirmidhi in his Sunan does the same. And so it's possible, it's likely to be his, and Allah knows best. Okay, there's another one here about dreams, which again, how many times should we send salat upon the Prophet in a day? As many as you can. There's no limit, there's no maximum or minimum, as many as you can. Was Qulayb a companion? If so, why did he need to ask Ibn Abbas regarding the authenticity of the dream? No, Qulayb wasn't a Qurayb, not Qulayb, Qurayb. And Qurayb wasn't a companion, but he was from the Tabi'in, from the students of Ibn Abbas. Hadith 411, Auf narrates, I am older than Qatada. What is the purpose of this inclusion? He's just simply saying that I'm older than him. Like some of these, as I said, some of these narrations are to do with the chain of narrators. And the scholars used to mention these narrations to show that this scholar is older than that one. And so he met that companion, whereas this one would have been younger. He didn't live to see that companion and so on. This is something common in the books of hadith. And as I said, when it comes to something like Shamai'l, it seems like some of these narrations, why they're added by a scribe or by one of the students, or maybe they were out of place, they should have been somewhere else and so on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. During the Isnad courses, do we have to offer Tahiyyat al-Masjid when coming back from our lunch break, or every time we go out of the masjid? Unless it's very short, yes. So unless you're literally popping out and popping in, like sometimes you do, like maybe your wife's outside, you need to hand her your keys, for example. She needs your car keys. You simply step out the masjid a few steps, you go and give it to her. Within a few seconds, you're back, inshallah, then it's okay. But if you're going out for lunch, you're out for a while, then you come back, then yes, you pray Tahiyyat al-Masjid. Should we pray Sunnah at home if we can? We cover this in detail. Like the things that we covered in detail in class, if you missed it, as I've said before, the etiquette is that you go back to the class and you watch the lessons and you take from there, rather than repeating stuff that we've already, it shows to me that not everyone was watching the whole thing. Now they have all of these questions that they want answered. What's happened to the other Al-Isnad YouTube channel? Is it still active? No. So this is the one that we're using now. So I would appreciate if everyone could subscribe to this one and like this one and whatever else that you have to do. If this is the one that you could do, that would be good. Jazakumullah khairan. If you have strong students of knowledge amongst us who are advanced in English and Arabic, can they assist Sheikh Hassan? Yes, they can. If you email us at whatever the email is, inshallah, Ishmam will put it up in the Telegram group, and you just give us like your CV or stuff that you've done. That would be very good. And whether it's for the next course or over time, at some point we will need to have a group. Like we want to have groups of people helping. So one of the things we also need, guys, is helping with our marketing. So people that are good with designing posters, video editing, that kind of stuff, please let us know. Again, send us. Like, don't think that you're good and you've never done it before, or like if you actually like you've done stuff like this before and you think that you have the capability to do this, then please let us know. And especially if you can show some of your stuff, inshallah, that would be helpful. So as I said before, everyone in Isnad is a volunteer. Like no one's getting paid for anything, so we're all volunteers, and so that would help us therefore to build this team and to do stuff. So whether it's transcribing, editing books, whether it's translating books, whether it's video editing, marketing, whatever it is that you can offer, we have asked previously as well, but just let us know, inshallah ta'ala, and then at least we know, so when the time comes we can reach out to you. There is a popular commentary of Shamai'l Tirmidhi by Muhammad Zakaria Kandahlawi. Would you recommend this as a circulation amongst students? All of these commentaries are good, to be honest. There are many commentaries and majority of them are good. Doesn't mean that everything that every scholar says is correct or that it's the most strongest position or whatever. But, that's how commentaries are. Not necessarily everything that I say would be correct or is the strongest position either. Everyone does it to the best of their ability. Okay. Do asthma pumps invalidate fasting? No. Inshallah, they don't. And Allah knows best. Okay. So with that, inshallah, I think we've clocked all of the questions that we have here. So, Ishmam, I think that will be the end of today's session. Barakallahu feekum. And as I said, then inshallah ta'ala, Ramadan is tafsir, and then our next Isnad course will be after the month of Ramadan. And so this is pretty much coming like to the end of year one of Isnad, pretty much, and then inshallah we can start our second year after the month of Ramadan.
Jazakallah khair for your time, Sheikh Hassan. Just to go through the announcement we made at the beginning and remind the students that there is a link for the Arabic form within the Al-Isnad group chat. So we would love for all of you to provide feedback as to how we can tailor the course to suit everyone's needs. The second one being the ijazas will be sent out by the end of this week for Shamai'l al-Tirmidhi, inshallah. And the third being Tafsir al-Sa'di, inshallah, will take place within Ramadan after Dhuhr. Reminding all of you guys that after Sunday, the clocks will change. So the timings will change by an hour, but it will be a consistent ongoing course within Ramadan. Jazakallahu khair for everyone who has attended today. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you, and I hope you all keep attending these courses and keep the chains of knowledge going. Barakallah.